Amaka stood at the edge of the dusty road, the sun setting over the small village of Nsukka, casting a golden glow on the thatched roofs and fields of cassava. Her heart felt heavy, filled with excitement and sadness. Today, she was leaving the only home she had ever known. She had grown up in the quiet rhythms of rural life, watching her parents toil on the family farm. But Amaka had always dreamed of something more. She longed for the life Lagos had to offer, the promise of opportunities, and a better future for her and her family. Her mother, Nsukka, fussed over her, adjusting the scarf on her head one last time. "Remember to be careful in Lagos, my daughter," she said, her voice soft but filled with worry. "The city is not like here. Stay focused. Don't trust just anyone." Amaka nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. "I will, Mama," she reassured her, though the stories she had heard about Lagos, the chaos, the crime, the opportunities, were swirling in her mind. The bus ride to Lagos was long, but Amaka barely noticed. The closer they got to the city, the more her anticipation grew. Finally, after hours on the bumpy road, they arrived. Lagos was unlike anything she had ever seen. Vast, crowded, and alive. As she stepped off the bus at the bustling motor park, the noise and rush overwhelmed her senses. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky, and everywhere she looked, people moved quickly, as if the city's rhythm demanded speed. Nsukka, her cousin who had lived in Lagos for years, was waiting for her. He greeted her with a warm smile and a quick embrace. "Welcome to Lagos, Amaka. Are you ready for this?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Amaka nodded, though her nerves were on edge. She had come to Lagos with high hopes of working as a domestic worker for a wealthy family, the Owolawbis. It was a chance to save money and support her family back home. But the reality of the bustling city was hitting her hard. Nsukka took her to the Owolawbi mansion in Victoria Island, an upscale area filled with wealth and privilege. The mansion was massive, with tall gates and manicured lawns. Amaka's breath caught in her throat as they approached the front door. She had never seen such luxury before. Mrs. Owolawbi, a tall, elegant woman with sharp features, greeted them at the door. She looked Amaka over with a critical eye, making Amaka feel small and out of place. "So, you're the new help?" Mrs. Owolawbi asked, her tone cold and distant. Amaka nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. I expect nothing less than perfection. The children need care, and the house must be spotless. Is that clear?" Mrs. Owolawbi's words were sharp, and Amaka could feel the weight of her new responsibilities pressing down on her. She swallowed her nerves and nodded again. "Yes, ma'am." The days that followed were tough. Amaka's duties seemed never-ending. Cooking, cleaning, running errands, and looking after the two Owolawbi children, Tobi and Kemi. The children, though charming at times, could be a handful, and their constant demands kept Amaka on her toes. She woke up before dawn and worked long into the night, often collapsing into bed, exhausted. Though the work was hard, Amaka found comfort in her growing bond with the children. Tobi, the eldest, had a mischievous streak, but his curiosity and sharp mind reminded her of her younger siblings back home. Kemi, the younger of the two, was gentle and sweet, often following Amaka around the house like a shadow. Despite the tough exterior of the Owolawbis, Amaka found moments of warmth in the home, particularly in the time she spent with the children. However, as the months passed, the pressures of working for the Owolawbi family began to take a toll. Mrs. Owolawbi was never satisfied, always finding fault with Amaka's work, no matter how hard she tried. "The floors aren't polished properly, Amaka," she would say, or, "The children's uniforms aren't perfectly ironed." Every day brought new criticism, and though Amaka worked tirelessly, she could never seem to please her employer. Meanwhile, Mr. Owolawbi was often away on business, but when he was home, his presence was intimidating. He rarely spoke to Amaka directly, but his piercing gaze and commanding demeanor made her feel nervous and uneasy. She avoided him as much as possible, focusing on her work and the children, who seemed to be the only bright spot in her daily life. One evening, after a particularly long day of cleaning and running errands, Amaka sat with Aisha, one of the other domestic workers who lived nearby. The two had struck up a friendship, finding solace in their shared experiences as workers in the homes of wealthy Lagosians. "Sometimes I wonder why I left the village," Amaka confided, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "The city is nothing like I imagined. It's hard, Aisha, so hard." Aisha nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Lagos isn't easy for people like us, Amaka, but you're doing what you have to do for your family. That's something to be proud of." As difficult as life in Lagos was, Amaka knew that Aisha was right. She had come to the city with a purpose, to earn money and support her family. But deep down, she wondered if this was all there was for her. Would she spend her life working as a domestic worker, living in the shadows of other people's wealth? Or was there something more waiting for her? One day, as Amaka was dusting the bookshelves in the Owolawbi living room, she overheard a conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Owolawbi. They were arguing, their voices sharp and tense. "We can't keep doing this, Gabenga," Mrs. Owolawbi snapped. "You're putting everything at risk." Mr. Owolawbi's voice was low but firm. "You worry too much, Bola. I've handled it before, and I'll handle it again." Amaka's heart raced as she quietly moved closer to the door, straining to hear more. What were they talking about? The tension in their voices suggested something serious, something dangerous. She quickly finished her work and left the room, her mind racing with questions. That night, as Amaka lay in bed, the conversation she had overheard replayed in her mind. She knew better than to pry into the affairs of the family she worked for, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Owolawbis were hiding something, and whatever it was, it seemed to be causing a great deal of strain between them. The more Amaka thought about it, the more uneasy she became. She had always sensed that there was more to the Owolawbi family than met the eye. They were wealthy, yes, but there was a darkness beneath the surface, a tension that seemed to pervade the air in their home. Amaka couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew that something was off. A few weeks later, while cleaning Mr. Owolawbi's study, Amaka made a startling discovery. She had been dusting the bookshelves when a small leather-bound journal fell from behind a stack of books. Curious, she opened it, her eyes scanning the neatly written pages. What she read made her blood run cold. The journal belonged to Lola, the Owolawbi's eldest daughter, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. No one in the family ever spoke about Lola, and Amaka had assumed that she was away at school or living abroad. But as she read the journal, she realized that Lola hadn't simply left the family. She had vanished under suspicious circumstances. Lola's journal entries were filled with fear and confusion. She wrote about strange meetings her father had with men in the dead of night, secret deals, and threats that had been made against her family. The last entry was the most chilling. "I don't know how much longer I can keep quiet. If I disappear, it won't be an accident." Amaka's hands shook as she closed the journal. What had happened to Lola? Had she been taken, or worse, killed? The more Amaka thought about it, the more she realized that Lola's disappearance was somehow connected to the tension she had noticed between Mr. and Mrs. Owolawbi. Amaka knew she had to leave the Owolawbi mansion, but the idea of escaping without drawing suspicion was daunting. She couldn't just pack her things and disappear. Mrs. Owolawbi would notice immediately, and Mr. Owolawbi's temper was unpredictable. One evening, while she was in the kitchen, Amaka confided in Aisha again, explaining that she couldn't leave without making sure the children were safe. Aisha looked at her with concern. "Amaka, you can't save everyone," she said softly. "You need to save yourself first." But Amaka couldn't shake the feeling that leaving the children in the Owolawbi house would be a mistake. She knew the mansion harbored dark secrets, and the children were innocent in all of this. If she left without a plan, who would protect them? The following morning, as Amaka was folding laundry, she noticed Kemi watching her intently. The little girl had always been curious, but today her gaze felt different, more serious, almost sad. "Amaka," Kemi whispered, "I know you're scared." Amaka froze. How could Kemi know about her fears? She knelt at Kemi's level and gently asked, "What do you mean, Kemi?" Kemi glanced around nervously before whispering, "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking. They said bad people are coming, and they're going to take us away, like they took Lola." Amaka's heart skipped a beat. Kemi's words confirmed her worst suspicions. The Owolawbi children were in danger, just like Lola had been. She had no choice now. She needed to act fast. Amaka spent the next few days plotting her escape. She knew she couldn't confront the Owolawbis directly. Mr. Owolawbi's connections were too powerful, and Mrs. Owolawbi's paranoia had only intensified. Amaka decided that the only way to keep herself and the children safe was to disappear. Late one night, after the household had gone to bed, Amaka packed a small bag with essential items. She had saved enough money to last her for a short while, but it wouldn't be easy to survive in Lagos without a steady job. Still, she was determined to leave before the situation spiraled any further. Just as she was about to sneak out, she heard a soft knock on her door. Tobi stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. "Are you leaving, Amaka?" he whispered. Amaka's heart broke, but she nodded. "Yes, Tobi. I have to go. It's not safe here anymore." Tobi clung to her, tears welling up in his eyes. "Take us with you," he begged. "I don't want to stay here. I'm scared." Amaka's resolve hardened. She couldn't leave Tobi and Kemi behind, not after what she had discovered. She knew that running away with the children would be risky, but it was the only way to protect them. She quickly gathered their belongings, urging them to stay quiet as they slipped out of the house. The streets of Lagos were dark and quiet as they made their way to Aisha's apartment. Amaka's heart pounded with fear. Every shadow felt like a threat, every passing car a potential danger. But she couldn't turn back now. The Owolawbis had made their deal, and she wouldn't let the children become victims of their greed. When they finally arrived at Aisha's apartment, Amaka breathed a sigh of relief. Aisha let them in without question, her expression grim. "You did the right thing," she said, hugging Amaka tightly. "But this isn't over yet." Mr. Owolawbi kept calling Amaka's phone, but she didn't accept the calls. She knew that the Owolawbis wouldn't let the children's disappearance go unnoticed. The next morning, the news spread quickly. Mr. Owolawbi had called in favors with the police, and soon there were search parties all over the city. Amaka and the children had to stay hidden. Aisha helped them lay low, but Amaka could feel the pressure mounting. She knew it was only a matter of time before the Owolawbi's influence reached them. The city, which had once been a place of opportunity, now felt like a prison closing in on them. Amaka didn't know who she could trust. The Owolawbis had powerful connections, and it wouldn't be long before they tracked her down. But she couldn't give up, not while Tobi and Kemi were depending on her for safety. One afternoon, as Amaka and Aisha were walking through a crowded market, they spotted two men in dark suits scanning the area. Amaka's heart raced. She recognized them from the Owolawbi mansion. They were Mr. Owolawbi's men. She quickly pulled Aisha to the side, hiding behind a stall of fabric until the men walked by. "We can't stay here," Amaka whispered urgently. "They're looking for us." Aisha nodded, and the two of them quickly made their way back to the apartment. They had to come up with a new plan, and fast. Amaka knew that if Mr. Owolawbi's men found them, it would be the end of everything. She would be dragged back to the mansion, and the children's fate would be sealed. The fear of being found out weighed heavily on Amaka, but she knew she couldn't give up. She had come too far, and the children needed her. With Aisha's help, she began to devise a new plan. They would have to leave Lagos, go somewhere far enough that the Owolawbis couldn't reach them. As the days went by, the situation became more precarious. Amaka could feel the noose tightening, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. She had one goal: to keep Tobi and Kemi safe, no matter the cost. But as they prepared to leave Lagos, a new complication arose. Mrs. Owolawbi, who had been kept in the dark about her husband's dealings for years, discovered what was happening. She confronted Mr. Owolawbi, demanding to know the truth about Lola and why her children were in danger. The argument was fierce, and for the first time, Mrs. Owolawbi realized the full extent of her husband's criminal empire. Furious and terrified for her children, Mrs. Owolawbi made a decision. She sent a voice note to Amaka, pleading with her to take the children far away and protect them. "I didn't know," she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling. "Please, keep them safe. I'll do whatever I can to help you." Amaka was shocked by the message, but she could hear the desperation in Mrs. Owolawbi's voice. It was clear that the once powerful woman was now just as scared as Amaka was. Amaka and the children were able to slip out of Lagos undetected. The escape was tense and dangerous. At every checkpoint, Amaka feared they would be caught. But with Mrs. Owolawbi's inside knowledge and Aisha's support, they managed to leave the city behind. They traveled for hours, moving deeper into the countryside, far from the reach of Mr. Owolawbi and his men. Eventually, they found refuge in a small village, nestled in the hills far from the chaos of Lagos. The villagers were kind and welcoming, offering them a place to stay and work to support themselves. For the first time in months, Amaka felt a sense of peace. The children were safe, and the constant fear that had gripped her heart began to fade. As they settled into their new life, Amaka couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. She had left her village in Nsukka with dreams of a better life in Lagos, but the reality had been far different from what she imagined. Still, she had found strength in her struggle, and now, she had something even more precious: a family. But even in their quiet new life, the shadows of the past lingered. Amaka knew that Mr. Owolawbi wouldn't stop searching for them. His reach was long, and his desire for control was unrelenting. Though they had escaped for now, the battle wasn't over. Amaka looked at Tobi and Kemi, playing happily in the village square, and made a silent vow. She would fight for them, protect them, and make sure they never had to live in fear again. As the sun set over the hills, casting a golden glow on the village, Amaka felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, but they had come so far, and no matter what lay ahead, she knew that they would face it together. As the weeks passed, life in the small village began to feel like a new normal for Amaka, Tobi, and Kemi. The villagers were kind, and although the work was hard, it gave them a sense of purpose and stability. Amaka took on various jobs, helping in the local market, and soon enough, she became part of the tight-knit community. However, the nagging fear that Mr. Owolawbi's men might find them never left her. One afternoon, while Amaka was at the market with Kemi, she noticed a stranger walking through the village, asking questions. Her heart immediately raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that this man might be connected to the Owolawbis, despite his friendly demeanor. She quickly pulled Kemi behind a stall, watching the man from a distance. He was speaking with some of the villagers, but Amaka couldn't hear what he was saying. Her instincts told her something was off, and she wasted no time getting Kemi and Tobi back to the small house they were renting. She had to act fast. If the stranger was one of Mr. Owolawbi's men, they didn't have much time. Amaka's mind raced as she considered their next move. Could they keep running? How long could they stay hidden before the Owolawbi Empire caught up with them? Amaka called Aisha, who had been her lifeline throughout this entire ordeal. Aisha listened carefully and agreed that it was time to leave the village. "You can't stay there if they're looking for you," Aisha said firmly. "But we need a plan. Somewhere they won't think to search." That evening, Amaka made a decision. They couldn't keep running forever. The only way to truly escape was to confront the source of the danger, Mr. Owolawbi himself. But how could she, a domestic worker, take on such a powerful man? The idea seemed impossible, yet it was the only way to ensure their safety. Amaka spent the next few days laying low, watching for any signs of the stranger. She was careful to avoid drawing attention to herself or the children. In the meantime, Aisha made contact with someone from the city who might be able to help. A lawyer, Barrister Okechukwu, who had a reputation for standing up to powerful figures. He had taken on cases against corrupt officials and won. If anyone could help, it would be him. Amaka met with Barrister Okechukwu in secret, explaining everything she had witnessed at the Owolawbi mansion, the mysterious disappearance of Lola, the illegal dealings, and the threats. The barrister listened intently, his face serious as he processed the information. "You're dealing with dangerous people, Amaka," he said after a long pause. "But if what you're saying is true, we can build a case against Mr. Owolawbi. It won't be easy, but I believe we can take him down." Amaka felt a glimmer of hope. This was the break she had been waiting for. But she knew that going up against someone as powerful as Mr. Owolawbi would put her and the children in even more danger. Was she willing to risk everything to expose the truth? After days of careful consideration, Amaka decided that she had no choice. She couldn't keep running, and she couldn't live in fear for the rest of her life. With Barrister Okachukwu's help, she would take on Mr. Owolawbi and fight for justice, not just for herself, but for the children and for Lola. The barrister began gathering evidence, piecing together the case against Mr. Owolawbi. It was a painstaking process, but slowly they built a strong case. Amaka provided testimony about the things she had witnessed, and Barrister Okechukwu began contacting others who had been affected by Mr. Owolawbi's illegal dealings. Slowly but surely, the walls around the powerful man's empire began to close in. But the danger was far from over. Mr. Owolawbi's men continued to search for Amaka, and the pressure on her grew more intense. She had to move frequently, staying one step ahead of them. Despite the growing threats, Amaka remained determined. She was doing this not only for herself, but for the children and all the others who had suffered under Mr. Owolawbi's reign. One evening, just as Barrister Okechukwu was finalizing the legal documents and some evidence they had gathered, it was time to get the police involved. Amaka received a call from someone unexpected. Mrs. Owolawbi. The woman was frantic and scared. She wanted to help Amaka take her husband down, but she needed assurance that her children would be protected. "He's out of control, Amaka," she said in the message. "I know what he's capable of, and I can't let him hurt anyone else. I'll testify if it means keeping Tobi and Kemi safe." Amaka's mind raced as she considered Mrs. Owolawbi's plea. If the once powerful matriarch was willing to testify, it could be the turning point they needed to bring Mr. Owolawbi down. But Amaka also knew that trusting her was a huge risk. She could easily be setting them up for betrayal, perhaps even working with her husband to dismantle the case against him. That evening, Amaka discussed the situation with Barrister Okechukwu. If Mrs. Owolawbi is serious, her testimony could be the key to unraveling everything, he said thoughtfully. "But we need to be careful. If she's lying, it could destroy the case." Amaka nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had seen firsthand what the Owolawbis were capable of, and the idea of Mrs. Owolawbi turning against her husband was almost too good to be true. But the children, Tobi and Kemi, deserved to be free from the horrors of their family's past. Amaka had to make a choice. After much deliberation, Amaka decided to take the risk and work with Mrs. Owolawbi. She believed that the woman's desperation was real, that she genuinely wanted to protect her children and escape from her husband's shadow. Barrister Okechukwu arranged a formal meeting with Mrs. Owolawbi to get her sworn statement. The atmosphere in the lawyer's office was tense as Mrs. Owolawbi recounted the truth about her husband's criminal dealings. She confirmed that Mr. Owolawbi had been involved in illegal financial schemes and human trafficking, and even arranged for the disappearance of their daughter, Lola. As she spoke, her hands shook and tears filled her eyes. "I couldn't stop him," she whispered. "He's too powerful. But I'll testify. I'll tell the court everything. I just want to keep my children safe." Amaka felt a wave of relief, but a small part of her still wondered whether Mrs. Owolawbi could truly be trusted. With Mrs. Owolawbi's testimony now part of the case, Barrister Okechukwu moved quickly to file the necessary documents and prepare for the trial. The evidence they had collected, combined with the testimony, was enough to bring criminal charges against Mr. Owolawbi. But as they moved closer to the trial date, the threats against Amaka and Okachukwu's team intensified. Anonymous phone calls, suspicious cars outside their offices, and even break-ins became a regular occurrence. Mr. Owolawbi's influence was far-reaching, and he clearly wasn't going to let the case go without a fight. Despite the growing danger, Amaka refused to back down. She had come too far to let fear stop her now. With Barrister Okachukwu's guidance, she prepared to face Mr. Owolawbi in court, determined to seek justice for Lola and protect Tobi and Kemi from their father's corruption. Just days before the trial, a major setback occurred. Barrister Okachukwu's lead investigator, the one who had uncovered much of the crucial evidence, suddenly vanished. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the team, and Amaka feared that Mr. Owolawbi's men had finally gotten to him. Panic set in as they realized the trial could be compromised without the investigator's testimony. The disappearance left a gaping hole in their case, and Barrister Okechukwu scrambled to find alternative ways to present the evidence. But without the key witness, the case felt weaker, and Amaka feared they might lose their chance to bring Mr. Owolawbi to justice. Despite the setback, Barrister Okechukwu refused to give up. He and his team doubled down on their efforts, determined to push forward with the trial. They rallied the remaining witnesses and worked tirelessly to strengthen their arguments. Amaka, too, found strength in the midst of adversity. She had faced unimaginable challenges since leaving the Owolawbi mansion, but through it all, she had remained resilient. She drew comfort from her bond with Tobi and Kemi, knowing that everything she had done was for them. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed with onlookers, journalists, and legal professionals eager to see the showdown between Barrister Okechukwu and Mr. Owolawbi's powerful legal team. The atmosphere was electric with tension as the proceedings began. Amaka sat in the gallery, her heart pounding as the prosecution laid out the evidence they had gathered. They presented financial records, documents, and the testimony of several key witnesses. The case was compelling, but everyone knew that Mrs. Owolawbi's testimony was the linchpin. When Mrs. Owolawbi finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She sat tall, her expression resolute as she recounted the events that had led to her husband's criminal activities. She spoke of the night Lola disappeared and revealed the secret meetings she had witnessed between her husband and his associates. As Mrs. Owolawbi spoke, the tension in the courtroom grew palpable. Amaka watched, holding her breath, as the truth about the Owolawbi family finally came to light. Mrs. Owolawbi's testimony was devastating, and it left no room for doubt. Mr. Owolawbi was guilty. After hours of intense testimony, the judge adjourned the trial for the day. Amaka left the courthouse feeling a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The end was in sight. In the days that followed, the prosecution continued to build their case, and despite the odds, they gained momentum. Mr. Owolawbi's defense team was formidable, but the overwhelming evidence and Mrs. Owolawbi's testimony had struck a fatal blow. Finally, after weeks of deliberation, the court reached a verdict. Mr. Owolawbi was found guilty on multiple charges, including financial crimes, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. As the verdict was read, Amaka felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The nightmare was finally over. Mr. Owolawbi's reign of terror had come to an end, and justice had been served for Lola and all those who had suffered under his power. For Amaka, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. She had faced unimaginable challenges and had come out the other side stronger. Now she could finally look forward to a future free from fear. With the help of Barrister Okechukwu, Amaka and the children settled into a new life, far from the chaos of Lagos. They found peace in a quiet town where they could rebuild their lives and create new memories. Amaka's journey had been long and difficult, but she had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage, and determination could triumph over evil. She had escaped the chains of her past and found a new beginning for herself and the children she had come to love as her own. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow on their new home, Amaka knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. The future was bright, and she was ready for whatever it held. The months that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding for Amaka, Tobi, and Kemi. They had finally found peace, far from the dark shadow that had hung over them for so long. Amaka had never imagined that her life would take such a tumultuous turn when she first left her village in Nsukka. But through it all, she had become a stronger, more resilient woman. Their new town was a small, quiet place, nestled between rolling hills and lush greenery. It was far removed from the bustling chaos of Lagos, and the people were warm and welcoming. Amaka found work at a local community center, helping to organize events and care for children while their parents were at work. It wasn't the life of luxury that Lagos had promised, but it was a life filled with purpose, and for the first time in a long while, Amaka felt a deep sense of contentment. Tobi and Kemi adjusted well to their new surroundings. Though the memories of their past still lingered, the children had begun to thrive in their new environment. They made friends easily, and their days were filled with laughter, school, and play. Amaka watched over them with a sense of pride and love that she hadn't fully understood until now. She had become their protector, their caretaker, and in many ways, their mother. Despite the calm that had settled over their lives, Amaka knew that the scars of the past couldn't be erased entirely. There were moments when Tobi would have nightmares, crying out in the middle of the night for the sister he had lost. Kemi, though quieter in her grief, would often sit by herself, lost in thought, as if trying to piece together the fragments of her memories. Amaka comforted them as best as she could, knowing that healing took time, but she never stopped worrying about what the future might hold for them. Years later, Amaka, Tobi, and Kemi settled into their peaceful life in the small town. They had become integral members of the community, known for their kindness and resilience. Amaka continued to work at the community center, while Tobi and Kemi excelled in their studies. One day, a surprising visitor arrived. It was Mrs. Owolawbi, who had been hiding in a nearby village after her husband's imprisonment. She had been following Amaka's story and wanted to apologize for her past actions. She also revealed that she had managed to secure a small inheritance from her family, which she offered to help Amaka and the children with. Amaka was hesitant to trust Mrs. Owolawbi at first, given her past association with Mr. Owolawbi. However, Mrs. Owolawbi's sincerity was evident, and she eventually agreed to accept her help. Mrs. Owolawbi used her connections to help Amaka secure a scholarship to a local university. Amaka excelled in her studies, graduating with honors. She went on to become a successful businesswoman, opening her own small business in the town. Meanwhile, Tobi and Kemi had also grown into successful adults. Tobi became a skilled mechanic, while Kemi pursued a career in education. They both found love and built their own families. Amaka's story became an inspiration to many in the community. She had overcome adversity, found hope in the darkest of times, and built a new life for herself and her family. Her courage and resilience were a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and triumph.
Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey through Amaka's life. Her story of resilience, hope, and determination has shown us that no matter the challenges we face, there is always a way forward. From the bustling streets of Lagos to the quiet strength she found in the village, Amaka proved that true strength comes from within and that we can overcome even the darkest of times. If Amaka's story touched your heart and reminded you of the importance of community, courage, and perseverance, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring African tales. These stories of life, love, and the strength of the human spirit will continue to uplift and motivate you. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. There's so much more to discover. and we can't wait to share the next tale with you. Join us in celebrating the richness of our stories, the power of our heritage, and the strength that lies within each of us. Let's keep learning, growing, and inspiring each other, one story at a time.